One other thing that we've done at Yahoo and announced very recently is move away from annual performance ratings. And in its place, we've introduced and we continue to champion, encourage one-to-one check-ins between manager and employee to give feedback more than twice a year, to make it such that feedback doesn't feel awkward, doesn't feel uncomfortable, is expected, is solicited. So in the absence of a performance rating where there isn't this dread that if I get negative feedback, it's going to impact my performance rating, managers are just a little bit freer to bring in some of those suggestions for improvement or request to pivot. When I announced it to an executive offsite of our sort of top 100 in the summertime, I had a standing ovation. There was such a feeling of relief, I think.
Lisa Moore, Senior Executive Vice President and Chief People Officer at Yahoo, is a globally experienced and highly strategic HR leader with a proven track record hiring and leading high-performing teams in the media and technology space. Lisa, welcome to Voices of HR.
Hi, Berta. Thank you for having me.
Well, we are so excited to have this conversation because knowing that you are leading at Yahoo and knowing that Yahoo has been transforming itself over the last few years, this is going to be an exciting conversation for our Voices of HR audience.
Yeah, I think so. I'm looking forward to talking to you about it.
So let's start here. So you are clearly a strategic CHRO, which means you have the insight to look into the future and really make bets on what will be best for your organization, your brand, your team members. What changes were you seeing that needed to be addressed strategically at Yahoo? Was it process, performance management, pay equity, all the above? What were you recognizing needed to change?
So to place it in context, Berta, I think the point from which I was evaluating all of the HR suite of programs and policies was a point in time where the company was being sold from public ownership under Verizon to a private equity firm. So in September 2021, Apollo Global Management bought the company that is now called Yahoo, which underneath is the merged entities AOL, Yahoo, and then obviously we have a bunch of new folks who've joined since that merger in 2017. But you can imagine public ownership within Verizon, which numbers some 110,000 employees, moving to private ownership in a PE structure, part of a fund, investors wanting return within a sort of, the fund has an end date. It was almost like everything needed to change. The sense of urgency, the sense of agility in terms of velocity around specifically product development, product evolution within all of the Yahoo suite. And then also culturally, this was a moment in time where we really had to look at ourselves and say, who are we? We had a new CEO at the time. So really, if you think about it, everything from the top down, leadership messaging, communication strategy from leadership. It's almost impossible to pick out what are the things that needed to change. It's easier to say what needed to stay the same. And what needed to stay the same, interestingly, it's so gratifying to hear you say one of the world's most recognized brands. It is one of the oldest brands on the internet. And from a cultural perspective, we're really anchoring ourselves back in the sense of being one of the original players. And given all of the chaos, disinformation, social media trends, and now what we realize impacts, it's time to go back to what was great about original Yahoo. And that's the framework within which we're placing everything. So trusted tools, simple guides, and I'm bringing that in to the HR agenda from the CHRO perspective to try to make everything clear and simple to understand, easy to navigate, and therefore building a sense of trust and engagement in the employee population.
So it sounds like you had the benefit, and I would say the benefit because some organizations go sideways because they don't do this every 5, 10, 15, 20 years, which is to start at the top and revisit the company strategy and what direction you want to go. And out of that flows brand and HR strategy. I think two of the most important strategies that can unfold from a company strategy. So when you went through that exercise and you recognized that certain things had to change, that you were going to go back and harken back into product development and go back to some of your history at Yahoo, from a people strategy perspective, can you help us link those two together? And what did you focus on first for the people?
So first of all, I want to just frame the idea that there was a start point to this exercise and maybe even an end point. One of the pillars, actually, of the trusted guide concept is that it's always under construction. And when I think about talent strategy, including my own team, one of the really successful characteristics of somebody who's going to thrive in Yahoo during this chapter is agility, right? Is ability to move with change, not obsess over perfection, take feedback and iterate along the way. And we're building what is required from a business strategy perspective into the talent agenda, into things like talent evaluation. We will do that against what we now understand to be those competencies and those mindsets, really, that are going to be able to position the company successfully. Then, again, thinking about moving away from a very large public company that needed in many ways to be extremely risk averse. And when you think about things like insurance claims, they needed to be fairly conservative in terms of what might be covered under a, let's take benefits package. Our open enrollment opened last week. Thinking about, again, we are Yahoo. Our audience is incredibly diverse. We need to reflect that within our employee population. So what do we need to do to attract talent that can then provide, whether it's editorial output or, again, go back to product development, products that are accessible, products that really do drive, don't exclude anybody. And in order to do that, just thinking about that back into the HR people agenda, I've been looking for those kind of edge cases that really make a difference to folks, but from a budgetary and fiscal responsibility standpoint, are not going to break the bank. So who are we excluding on the fringes where the instance rate is going to be low, but impact is huge? So things like same-sex couples, anybody who's going through any kind of non-traditional birth journey. We've really made sure that we're pushing the edges of our programs to include everybody we possibly can. And we've had some great feedback on that from both our employee population, and then that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because then our people are talking to their networks and people learn what we're doing, and that kind of comes back again. So I think it's about, on the one hand, being really clear what our employees are having to do when they show up at work, and equipping them to do that. Part of equipping them to do that is really making it feel like they're being seen and heard and respected in terms of the policies and the practices that we are offering from a people team perspective.
So I captured two big strategic intents, initiatives. The reevaluating of the people skills and really focusing on agility for those individuals. And then number two, inclusivity through benefits. And I love both of those. So can we dissect those both just a little bit? Because I think our audience would absolutely love to hear more about this. So the first one, if you're going through a little bit of a sea change at your organization and you're now saying, okay, here's the skills that you need to be successful here into the future, how are you reevaluating your existing population? And then how are you, again, trying to attract the right talent coming in?
So let me offer up something that I heard at a breakfast meeting earlier this year. And it was actually from the CHRO of IBM, who is incredibly impressive as an operator. And I highly recommend getting in touch with her to do a podcast. She was talking about upskilling company-wide at IBM a few years ago. This is going back a decade. The approach they took, which I think is always my preference, if possible, is to be transparent with the workforce. But what was super interesting was what they led with. It wasn't the skills that you possess that are going to indicate whether you can continue on and help IBM be successful in the future. It's actually just your appetite and your willingness to learn new ones. So making it a very democratic, inclusive process from the start, saying, these are the things, these are the traits, these are the attributes or technical skills. But first of all, let's see whether you vote in, whether you opt in or not. And I'll bring this to, we could talk about agility and the ability to operate in a squad formation rather than more of a siloed, hierarchical model of engineering leadership, design leadership, product leadership. The squad concept, which again isn't new, mixes those groups together in cross-functional groups, and then gives them challenges to deal with as an enmeshed community together. And everybody has the opportunity to feed in, everybody has the opportunity to come up with ideas, but everybody's expected to sign up to the code of conduct, which is asking the what if questions. Don't get entrenched in your prior experiences. Don't bring up all the reasons why this can't happen because you did something similar before 18 years ago.
Yes.
So again, I think what we are trying to do, and we have several units of the business migrating towards a squad model and trying it out and learning along the way. You have to be really transparent about what it will take to be successful so that people can opt in, just like the CHRO of IBM was saying. So the more you can be explicit and give people the opportunity to do their own research, watch videos on YouTube or anywhere about what it means to be successful in a squad and bring that. Even that in itself is an indicator of somebody who's leaning in, right? How many videos have you watched on this topic? How many books and magazine articles and podcasts have you exposed yourself to? So that I think is, it's not for me about spending millions of dollars on training. In my experience, I've yet to see a really compelling case where there is ROI on training programs. And I know that's a controversial statement because there are probably in your audience, there will be people running either training programs or running their own training companies.
Sure.
It has to me to be really surgically attached to what your goal and what your mission is. So in the squad idea, you would be putting people through workshops and role modeling and trying some of this stuff out. Keep it away from theoretical and make it much more practical.
Yes.
Give people the opportunity to practice to build this muscle. And you'll find those who obviously have a natural, not a skill, but a natural tendency to act that way. You'll have others who are like, oh my goodness, that makes such a difference. And you'll have others who'll be sitting with their arms crossed. And that in itself is like an assessment center, right?
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Real time.
Yeah, real time.
Now, do those squads at Yahoo, do they give each other feedback or do they receive feedback either during the special project or after so that they know, okay, you progressed, but here's some things that maybe you could apply differently next time?
Yeah. So I think there are a couple of aspects to unpick even within that question. One is about feedback on the product or the feature or the fix or whatever it is that you're working on. And that is a really important way in which you put something out, you test it, you get feedback on it, you move, you tweak and you move forward. And that's, again, the always under construction thing. So within the project infrastructure, there will be moments where there are feedback opportunities on the product. The key skills from a human perspective, more of the attributes and behaviors, I would say that is in development, specifically related to squads.
Okay.
One other thing that we've done at Yahoo and announced very recently is move away from performance ratings, annual performance ratings. And in its place, we've introduced and we continue to champion, encourage, like heavily encourage one-to-one check-ins between manager and employee to give feedback more than twice a year, to make it such that feedback doesn't feel awkward, doesn't feel uncomfortable, is expected, is solicited. And I think the next stage of that, which the business partner team is developing now, is what is it at a company level and at a business unit level within the company? What are those specific criteria that represent the greatest chance of success of this particular business unit, so that when we're giving feedback in those manager employee check-ins, it's around those behaviors specifically. Perfect. And at the same time, obviously managers are not, especially in a squad formation, line managers don't tend to work every day with their teams. They're more a coach than a player. They're more of a thought leader outside of squads. So we will depend on feedback tools, and we've built some rudimentary ones in Workday where managers can solicit feedback on the contribution of their employees. Now, most of what you're going to collect is going to be on, leaning positive, but that's also great. We definitely want recognition. I think where we get more accustomed, where we get more comfortable, is raising up the opportunities to tweak that behavior or come next time leading with this question rather than that question, and moving into you could say it more balanced, although what we also know is that you really have to hear 15, 16, 17 times more positive endorsement to be able to deliver anything constructive and it still be heard in the right way.
Well, absolutely. You want them to continue to be motivated to exhibit the right behavior. And, especially it sounds like it's real-time coaching. And, you're, I think, maybe the third guest that we have heard that is getting rid of annual appraisals and annual performance reviews. And how is it accepted at Yahoo?
So, and by the way, just to finish on the point of giving balanced feedback, in the absence of a performance rating, where there isn't this dread that if I get negative feedback, it's going to impact my performance rating.
Right.
Managers are just a little bit freer to bring in some of those suggestions for improvement or request to pivot, because it doesn't have the same heavy weighting. And it's certainly not being delivered in a year-end meeting because, as you say, it's more kind of always on or fast feedback. So I would say so far so good. When I announced it to an executive offsite of our sort of top 100 in the summertime, I had a standing ovation.
Wow.
There was such a feeling of relief. That's awesome. I think. The facts are the process end to end, which kicked off with self-evaluations and promotion nominations, that would be around now.
Right.
And the whole thing doesn't wrap up until March, April time. That's a significant chunk of the business year where
a lot of time.
If you're not actively working on gathering feedback for your employees, you're writing lengthy evaluations, you're actually making those calendar invites for the meetings themselves, which need preparing for. and are hugely emotionally draining for all concerned.
Yeah.
Nobody enjoys the annual performance rating
No,
meeting.
neither side does.
Neither side does.
Except for maybe 1% of your top performers, right?
Although, here's what is also interesting is human behavior. It seems like as humans, we generally want to be nice to each other. And so in years gone by, when it came to the calibration of performance ratings, we really found it tough to limit our top performers to the 5% or 10%, which would mean that that true outstanding contribution would be recognized in a pay for performance kind of way. We say we pay for I always struggle with this one, pay for performance. But
if anything needs an acronym, that's it, right? PFP.
PFP. But the fact is, with a finite budget for your bonus payout,
right.
If you do allow that top category to get above 20, 25%, you're really not rewarding over and above compared to the majority of the population. So, I think, again, there's just such a lot of stress on that process, and ultimately with little return. If you think about the marginal incremental bonus you would get for, doing everything you could this year to get a leading category of rating, it just ends up being hugely demotivating. So yes, top 100, standing ovation. Thank goodness we don't have to do this anymore.
That's great.
But at the same time, I was saying, but I'm taking this meeting and all hands in the middle as a sign of your commitment to driving a culture of fast feedback so that people know how they're doing, so that they can ensure they're focused on the right things. This is a large organization. It's 7,000 people. And some managers have large teams. And if they're not even meeting with their teams on a regular basis, how do we know that those individuals' contributions, one, that they're even bringing a contribution? They could be bored out of their minds waiting to hear from the manager what they should be doing, or working really hard, but then ultimately delivering something that doesn't go anywhere. So we've really got to tighten up on that manager individual conversation and exchange of information. And I think that's where we have to follow through on that commitment, because in the absence of that, people aren't sure how they're getting measured, how their contribution is being measured, because we will have bonuses or a bonus program that allows for discretion at a leader level. So how are those leaders deciding whose contribution is stronger, relatively speaking? So from my team's side and from the leader's side, we have to engage in really thoughtful, comprehensive dialogue around our strongest performers or strongest contributors and why we deem them to be stronger, relatively speaking, than everybody else. And so then what we can do is, award bonuses, assuming everybody is on track and meeting the expectations that have been set for them in those manager one-to-one check-ins. But using a discretionary pool, we can pull down into those extra strong, going over and above types of contributions. And again, linking the over and above nature of the contribution to agility, curiosity, coming up with ideas and following through, taking accountability. All the things that we've said, for example, are critical to working in a squad. We're going to be able to say, yes, this person's contribution really does bring home these concepts. Whereas this person who sits at the back of the room and folds their hands and just says, oh, well, that won't work. We've got something that we can measure that against.
So you do still have performance ratings. You do not have performance
ratings, no. But what we will do in sort of roundtable discussions with leaders in the business is discuss talent in a qualitative way. Ultimately, yes, we have to be able to say a pool of people, let's say 5% to 10% of people deserve extra this year. So who are they? So without using a rating, we can stack rank. And then when the compensation tool in Workday opens up in January, there'll be discretion to pull down discretionary amounts into individual bonus allocation. So no, there won't be a rating, but here's where you can pull a data point: is what percentage of target bonus payout did these individuals get? And as you as you see folks getting a larger proportional bonus, you know their contribution was deemed to be stronger, which is how you back into and assuage another concern from the employee workforce is, what about biases? How do we make sure this is fair? Well, so today we would use a list of performance ratings, and we would just make sure we're not over-indexing on any particular demographic within the organization. Well, we can still do that looking at where the discretionary dollars went. Let's make sure they didn't all go to this pool of people in this geographical location who look like this. And we can just make sure that we've got something that is representative of the organization, or more representative. And by the way, if it isn't, we just have to, again, go back to the evidence of why certain contributions were stronger than others.
What I love about what you have designed is that most people get hung up on the rating, the number. Where do I stack up? And you truly have enacted a pay for performance, because it's no longer about the rating. It's about the output or the impact, or how did you contribute to the organization and your peer group, maybe your pod. It is really advancing the ball on pay for performance.
Well, when you go back to your earlier question about what needed to be undone, redone, we're talking decades of a system that everybody became very familiar with, varying degrees of comfort with, but I think we all knew it didn't really drive that outcome.
Right.
And again, we'll do it. We'll do it for a couple of years, and we'll iterate and give it a go. I think it puts us in a better position, a stronger position than any of the other systems I've worked in, which were heavy on rating calibration, rating equals certain bonus range. All of these things gave us, in my view, the illusion of having a structure that was fair and safe and equitable, but it detracted from the quality conversation about the contribution. And I think as long as you, again, are setting those expectations up front, and then you're evaluating the contribution against those expectations, that in itself is what fair is. If you don't set expectations, people don't know what their goals are, and then they get a rating, that's not fair either. So you have to dial up this conversation. I was leading a workshop or a discussion group recently on this topic as we were introducing it, and they said, you know what? This was not a people team person. It was somebody in the business. They said, I think we need to make this a lifestyle. And I was like, you know what? You're absolutely right. We just need to make sharing feedback with each other a lifestyle.
We just had Claude Silver, who is the chief heart officer at Vayner Media, on a couple of weeks ago, and she talked about how they had read the book Candor.
Radical Candor.
Radical Candor. And instead of radical, it's kind. Yeah. Kind candor. And that was so well received at their organization. And, I think you're saying the same thing. It's constant feedback is the winner here. It also sounds like you're putting a lot more onus on the managers to lead. How are you evaluating whether they're doing their job? Because the people will succeed if the leader succeeds. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. And again, in the stage of evolution of the company, I think you have to lead with one thing, and then you learn what else you have to do behind that, right? You can't always line things up to be perfectly timed at the same time. And where I'm going with that is my stance on this is that nobody should be managing anybody unless they have explicitly signed up to that responsibility. I'm not talking about signing a piece of paper or a contract, but all too often people are elevated into positions of management, and then through restructures and organic growth in the company, their role grows and grows. And it does two things. Unless we've checked with them that they want to do this and they feel equipped and confident to do it, we've got people whose literal working lives are in somebody's hands who may not be particularly engaged in that activity. But the misconception, and maybe it is actually more accurate than I'm giving it credit for, career-wise, it's always been the assumption that if you're leading a team, that team gets bigger, you somehow become a candidate for promotion. So it's in your interests to gather more folks to get promoted. That is 100% the culture at Verizon, by the way. It's about demonstrating that you lead multiple groups. And where we are, 2/3 of the organization is engineering. And my husband is an engineer, so I feel I can say this. They're not all equipped to manage people as well as they are equipped to code.
Right.
So here's what my team and I are going to do is really look hard at what it is we're asking managers to do, and then look at our managers. And by the way, again, we haven't done, in certainly not the 9 years that I've been here, we've never done any kind of review of who is managing, who are they managing, where are those folks, especially in a remote and flexible working environment, and is this working? Is the manager taking it, do they take responsibility for being a manager, and have we invested in them? And instead, without doing that analysis, what we've done is develop management programs and try and put everybody through those programs. I've arrived at the conclusion it's not worth doing that. First of all, focus on those folks that want to manage and have the skills. And you won't find that is everybody. And so what do you do about that? You then look at whether the person you gave the managerial responsibility to is good and strong and equipped to move forward with whatever it was functionally that got them the job in the first place. If they're in the legal team, how's their domain expertise in that area that they work in? If they are an engineer, how is their coding? Can they move into AI? And then we've got a group of managers that want to manage, and we invest in them. And we've got a group of people who don't want to manage, don't enjoy it. Nobody on their teams is having a good time. They are, liberated from that responsibility with no change in pay. I'm not talking about changing any pay structure for them, but we get them to work coding the products that we need. And then you might have folks who are not strong managers. They're either not strong at coding or they're not prepared to learn new skills. And that is a different conversation. But again, let's move to a point where we're being more transparent about what the company needs, what we can offer individuals, and just start to unpick a little bit what it means to be a manager. Because you're right, this model only can be successful if everybody signs up to the commitment. So I think what we're trying to do is be explicit that this is a moment in time where we're saying, this is what it means to be a manager. And if every time you have a one-to-one with your employee, your heart sinks and your stomach turns over, that's telling you something. So let us help you out there.
Absolutely.
And so, sorry, just to put a pin in that, then how do you measure that, right? Multiple data sources are available throughout the organization. And some of them we look at, one-dimensionally, and I think we can build more of a scorecard or a dashboard overall. But we have engagement surveys twice a year. And any manager who has 5 or more responses to that survey, we can look at their groups. So it's anonymous, but if there's a group of 5 or more, then as a manager, you can see your team's results. And obviously your HR business partner can help you and support you with any gaps there. We have surveys for hiring managers. We actually, recently I realized the hiring manager can score the recruiter. And so I said, well, what would happen if the recruiter could score the hiring manager? Do they show up on time?
Turn about.
Do they cancel interviews at the last minute? When they show up at interview, how do they talk to the candidate? I heard some feedback recently that we had hiring managers who were saying, I don't know why we go through all the effort we do to give them a white glove service. When I was being hired, it was, you'd be lucky to get a job. So we just have to give some coaching to the hiring managers. But ultimately, if we can't trust them to represent the brand, and therefore, we're also questioning whether they recognize what the kind of talent is that we need, we can score that. If we have the recruiter scoring the hiring manager, that's just another data point on what is strong, who is strong, and who needs help in some of the key responsibilities of a manager. Again, if you're a manager, it is implied within that you are at some point going to be hiring somebody and therefore need to be able to represent us externally from a culture perspective as well as a company and product perspective.
Absolutely. Now, we had talked before about pay equity. And I know you are a huge advocate of ERG groups within Yahoo, specific ERG groups. You're also, obviously, with your benefits, really promoting inclusivity at your organization. So how did you go about pay equity, making sure that your organization was not paying any particular group too much and another group not enough?
So we started under Verizon actually to issue, or at the time when we were under Verizon, we contributed to an annual equity report. And within that, both representation across categories, including seniority, cutoff of director plus representation, that was produced for all the different Verizon groups, and one of those was us. So we've continued with that on an annual basis. But for me, with such a fast-moving organization, combination of M&A, new hiring into new roles, like we've talked about, we've needed to bring in, particularly in the product and engineering space, some new skills and definitely some wider, I would say, experience sets. And that costs in the marketplace. 2022, the Great Resignation, we were dealing with, I really dislike counter offers. We were seeing a lot of employees leave for other companies for astronomical packets of, at the time, RSUs. And then some of those folks were banging on the door again 6 months later saying, my RSUs aren't worth anything. Can I come back? So just to say, though, that if you are a company that hires, we hire on average 700 roles a year. New roles a year. You have that risk of tenured employees. You're not bumping up salary internally in every job category to match every job you're hiring in. We hire with geo-specific ranges, and we're a tech company predominantly, so we're placing a premium on some of those engineering skills and product skills. That means you have to pay attention on the inside to make sure that you're not getting out of whack, and specifically not getting out of whack for groups that are underrepresented. So we've been doing a twice a year pay equity review, which then it's done by an external firm because obviously, it needs to be seen to be neutral. And that will look across the board at every senior manager level role within data and research engineering. And so then we can see where there are any disparities, and if they're not explained by geolocation or any sort of extra premium that we know that particular role in that job group would necessitate, then there have been times where we've needed to make adjustments. I've worked in other environments, even within this company, where the compensation team in some way is trying to play gatekeeper. And for every single salary change internally, the compensation team is trying to look at the cohort and keep things within a certain range. Since we were sold from Verizon and now under PE and moving that much quicker and with a much more demanding roadmap of transformation, we haven't been able to do that with every role that we're hiring. Instead, we've had to work and move and then audit backwards, if you will. So increase the regularity with which we're doing the pay equity studies and then make adjustments on the back end. But I am pleased to say that because overall the value proposition of coming to Yahoo is strong from a culture and sort of vision perspective, and we have a great CEO, and we're our PE backers are our true backers and partners. People want to come because of the exciting stuff that's happening here. We're not having to go way, way, way above what our tenured employees are being paid. But we do have to continue to keep an eye on that.
So you also probably look at it through the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
100%. 100%. Yeah.
And do you feel like you're in a good place now with that? When you have an external group coming in to provide the information, that feels like you're headed in the right direction.
Yes, it does. And again, we've only ever had to make minor adjustments there. But of course, there is pay equity and there's pay gap analysis, right? I come from the UK where the gender pay gap reporting was introduced on a mandatory basis a few years ago. That calculation bundles all jobs together. So when you look at male versus female, if you have more male employees in senior roles, your average male hourly salary is going to be way higher than your female average hourly salary. And that is speaking to a problem of representation at senior levels in the organization. That is not the same as pay equity. So whilst I can say I am comfortable that we have pay equity across the company, we know that we are 67% male, 63% male, 37% female as of this month, which isn't good enough. So through our talent strategies, succession planning, promotion strategies, really looking at more diverse sources, not just the typical avenues to go get your engineers, and being creative also about those, where should you put your efforts? I think there are really underserved groups in the population that, again, you can lean into to help with your overall representation in your business. Amazingly strong qualified candidates. There was an article in the New York Post last weekend about the number of working mothers who've returned to work since the pandemic, who maybe weren't working before, but now that there are flexible working conditions, they can do both. They can. It's not the case that they have to commute after doing the school drop. They can manage. And I'm already generalizing massively to say that is women doing that, but we both know that tends to be the case. It tends to fall, the burden tends to fall on the women. And as you see more companies requiring return to office, it's the fathers who are going and commuting, and the women are stuck home again in the main. And so, again, just thinking about ways in which you can shift up representation across different levels of the organization, not the same as pay equity. Pay equity, I'm comfortable with. But gender representation, and I'm talking about all genders, definitely not where we need to be. And again, like an area of constant focus.
Well, we are coming to the end of our regular program. We do something at the end called rapid fire questions. So these are 1-sentence questions so that our audience gets to know you a little bit better. Are you willing to play?
I am.
Okay. All right. Let's do this. How did you wind up in HR? Is it something that you started out pursuing, or did you fall into it somehow?
I was good at ordering cars for newly qualified managers at Arthur Andersen. And I'm dating myself. But the car administration department was attached to HR. And so when I got my first job there out of college, just an admin job, the head of HR said, "You seem to be good with customers, especially those where something has gone wrong with the car," because that tends to happen a lot too. Right. And so that was my launch pad into HR, dealing with disgruntled recipients of new cars.
That is a first. What's your first 90-day playbook that you would recommend a new head of HR puts together?
I think for me, it's all about listening to as wide a group of people as you can possibly listen to, and not rushing into any early conclusions. And I think I would say, like I told you earlier, it's 9 years this year that I've been with Yahoo, but we have a new executive team member joining today, Chief Communications Officer from Lyft. Even in my relationship with her for 90 days, it's about listening. And it's about making sure that I help her get to know people in her organization. Because I think the more senior you get, the more risk there is that you become disconnected from folks in the organization. So I would say, especially if this 90-day plan is to be used to support somebody coming in at my level or a direct report to a C-suite person, you've got to keep rolling up your sleeves and resetting with relationships into the business. New folks who maybe came back to work for you, people returning from maternity leave, anybody who is, if you're in an ERG, which ideally you are, or as a new joiner into a team you're going to sign up to be, is meet folks through that. So you're seeing a broader perspective as you can. And then I'm somebody who really has to bring myself back to data, and I've got much better at it as I've got older. But some folks on my teams really use a lot of heavy instinct. And I think for HR people, you can operate on instinct and intuition, but you also have to know the numbers. So becoming fluent with not just your employee demographic information, but that is important. What's going on in the business? What's the revenue projection? Where are the blockages? Like, what are the challenges? Because I think unless you can attach what you're doing back to some of those gaps and opportunities, you are going to struggle to be seen as somebody outside of a HR person who's operating from a place of instinct and intuition. And sometimes our instinct and intuition sends us on the wrong path. And then when we actually pull the data, we're like, that really got blown out of perspective in my mind, but there isn't really a problem here. Or the problem is something different.
Right. If you could have your own billboard that would reach millions of people, what would your message be?
Am I allowed two?
Of course.
Okay, so the first is...
We'll make our own rules.
Yeah, the first is, and I say this to my kids a lot, and I end up saying it to people outside of work as well as inside of work. Not many things in life are irreversible, right? So just give it a go. Just give it a go and see. You can always go back on that decision or go in a different direction. I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to know something is going to be right before we move, and we waste a lot of time doing that. I'm not somebody who stews over things for a long time. Again, I have my husband to do that for me. So I'm the one that's like, let's run. And he's like, well, hang on, have you thought of this? And somewhere in the middle, And then the second one is just don't take yourself too seriously. I think so much of today's working environment is super tough. And through the pandemic and post-pandemic, it's really become apparent that if we are piling pressure on each other to be some sort of image professionally, we're just adding extra baggage, extra pressure that isn't required. That, being ourselves and having a joke and, having pink hair or whatever it is, like, don't take yourself too seriously because life is too short.
Very short. What's the main takeaway you want to leave our listeners with?
From an HR perspective, you don't have to do everything the way you always did it. And you'll be surprised how liberating yourself from some of those invisible structures that we've never really questioned why they're there is liberating for you, but it enables the business in a way that you won't be able to imagine. And then you can spend time doing stuff that really truly makes a difference and keeps you alive and thriving in your career.
Today, we have been joined by Lisa Moore, Chief People Officer at Yahoo. Thank you again so much for joining me, Lisa. It has been such a pleasure.
Thank you, Berta. It's been wonderful chatting to you.
I really hope you enjoyed this episode. Thanks so much for watching. We would love it if you shared your thoughts on any of the topics we discussed in the comments below. And if you got value from the video, it would mean the world to us if you hit the like button and subscribe to the HRMorning channel. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Voices of HR.